In today's episode of Hack Your Hascom, I have the pleasure of introducing you to my two dear guests, Michelle Baker and Beth Dederick. And I've invited them to get into a nice, in depth conversation with things related to product stewardship. So let's get right to it. For about Michelle Baker, Michelle has more than 25 years' experience in product stewardship and regulatory compliance. She has a BS in occupational safety and health and a master's in public health. She is a certified hazardous materials manager and certified dangerous goods professional by the Institute of Hazardous Materials Management. She's also a registered safety data sheet and label author by the American Industrial Hygiene Association registry programs. She's also currently employed at Zeon Chemicals in Louisville, Kentucky, as the Senior Product Stewardship Manager. My other guest today is Beth Dederick, who has over 20 years of environmental consulting experience focused on supporting the chemical, consumer product, oil and gas, and manufacturing industries in complying with global product stewardship requirements and implementing sustainability goals. Beth has presented at numerous global conferences and led global compliance programs for clients with target markets in Asia Pacific, Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Beth is also leading a number of LCA studies for a variety of products from cosmetics to manufactured goods. She is also the past president of the Society for Chemical Hazard Communication, having completed her 2-year term as president in 2024. Beth has a master's degree in environmental health science and a PhD in environmental health policy from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Welcome to you both today. Pleasure having you on. So let's get right into some of the difficult product stewardship discussions that we have. So for both of you, for those that may be unfamiliar with the concept of product stewardship, can you describe what it is and why should a company care? And let's start with you, Michelle. What do you think?
So if you Google product stewardship, you're going to see that it's really defined as someone who analyzes and reviews product throughout the development process, everything from development to end use and disposal, and its impact on the environment. So if you look at a Google definition, it talks about the environment, which is important, but product stewardship really is so much more. It is about reviewing chemicals and their impact to not only the environment, but to safety, human health, compliance, regulatory, and even finance or business continuity. So it really is a broad scope of review and how chemicals impact people, the environment, our business, and our customers. And I think that customers should care about product stewardship because it really is an umbrella that puts together all different subject matter experts throughout the company into, under one umbrella where we review it collaboratively. That's what product stewardship is for me in my company.
And Beth, do you care to bring your perspective into that?
Yeah, I think Michelle touched on many of the things that I would have said as well. I think the first thing that I would say when people ask, what does product stewardship mean? I'll say, well, the number of people you ask is the number of definitions you're going to get, right? So it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. Generally speaking, when I describe the work that my team and I do, we start by saying that we work with companies to bring products to market safely, sustainably, and in compliance with global regulations. And that on a task-by-task, day-by-day basis means many, many things. And Michelle listed a number of those. I think a point to emphasize, just as Michelle indicated, is we really are looking at the full life cycle of a product. And that particularly increasingly the current global marketplace and the regulatory frameworks in which we're working, that full life cycle perspective is very important and increasingly complex, and frankly has added a lot of challenges to the jobs of product stewards.
Great. And I'm sure we're going to get into some of those challenges as we get through some questions today. But again, it makes sense. And I think, when I talked about your background, Beth, the acronym LCA, I believe that is what likes life cycle analysis.
Exactly
Okay.
right. Absolutely.
Great. Great. Well, thank you for that. And I think, Michelle, you touched upon this a little bit earlier. Who are your typical company corporate stakeholders that really should be discussed included in the process for the product stewardship to be successful for an organization?
Well, I have to say that the company I work for Xeon Chemicals in Louisville, and uh, it's pretty amazing. I've worked for several companies throughout my career, and Xeon is special first because they consider product stewardship to be strategic. I report directly to the president and CEO of the company, and he has a large role in the product stewardship of our products. And I report to him, and that's purposeful. I report to him so that, and this has really been the case I've been at Xeon through a couple of presidents and CEO, and always reported directly to him or her because if there's ever a time that I have a concern that's not being considered across the organization or is not being addressed, then he knows. In policy, because of whom I report to, it is he wants everyone to know that I have his ear. That's one thing that is important. So the president, the upper management, the EMC, they are important. They have important roles in supporting and enforcing product stewardship and compliance. Also, we have a product stewardship review group, and it includes everyone from our technical team, research and development, purchasing, customer service, of course, safety and environmental teams, transport, warehouses, certainly operations and production, and even the sales folks have a representative on this group. So across the company, I always say I'm in customer service. And my customers are our customers, of course, but our customers are sales and marketing teams. They are our production and technical teams. So I'm there to be a resource to all of the groups that impact our product development, manufacture, and sale.
Great. Great. And I would imagine, Beth, would you on the consulting end, do you have touch points with a lot of those same stakeholders that Michelle mentioned?
Yeah, we sure do. And we really work with a diversity of organizations at ERM. A number of the organizations with whom we're working are very large, and they have fully built out product stewardship, product regulatory departments. And they do have the folks and the scientists and the regulatory specialists that Michelle has noted. Many of them have specialists in different regions around the world. One thing that I think is such an important perspective around product stewardship is the truly global nature and in the increasingly global complexity of the work that we do. So we do work with organizations that are fortunate enough to have dedicated product stewards in multiple regions, which is terrific. We also work with organizations that are much smaller and have much smaller product regulatory and product stewardship teams, and including organizations that don't have dedicated product stewards. Organizations usually that are smaller, startup organizations that are pretty lean and have to really rely on, shall we say, near neighbor disciplines to manage the regulations around products. And sometimes, often, that means we're working very closely with the environmental health and safety EHS teams. I think particularly as we're talking about the full life cycle of products. That's brought some additional stakeholders to the table when we're having these conversations around product stewardship. Um, we're often thinking across the supply chain, on the value chain of a product, and really trying to understand all of the components and the sourcing of those products. And so we've brought in some additional disciplines to the conversation. For example, we often have some conversations with procurement teams as well. Um, so I think having that broad perspective of stakeholders who can really impact and inform product stewardship conversations is important.
Great, great. And being on the consulting side of things, I would imagine having these difficult conversations or interfacing with the various stakeholders probably it puts you in on that outsider role, right? Because
Mhm.
you're not really the company employee. And I think maybe perhaps, Michelle's got a perspective on perhaps when she's dealt or if you have held those, you're the insider, right, Michelle, because you have the buy-in, you have ideally the management support for what you do. Interesting to see how the perspectives differ or perhaps are the same. And with the conversations you have on the product stewardship end of things. Would you both agree to that or probably have varying thoughts?
I think that Beth made a really good point about global collaboration. I think even small companies sell around the world. Um, as a matter of fact, I know that's true. I've worked for small companies and larger companies, and the global impact of product stewardship is pretty big. We're doing business around the world, and it used to be, it's so funny, when I got started in this industry, everybody did what the US did. We were the world's leader in environmental regulation. We were the world's leader in, having agencies responsible for safety and protection of the environment. But that really has changed. Unfortunately, maybe the United States is not the world leader, and so in the product stewardship role, you have to consider um, where your products are sold, and that brings in a larger group of stakeholders and collaborators. And Beth mentioned that you talk to, across the world. Like they may not be specifically named as product stewards, but certainly, regulatory compliance, maybe environmental health and safety. But we have manufacturing plants around the globe. We have sales offices around the globe. And as a matter of fact, our parent is a foreign parent. Our parent is in Japan. And so we work very closely together to make sure that, um, that the impact of chemicals to our customers, to the environment, our compliance is considered no matter where we make or sell products. Um, and I do think that it is a much larger role, expanded, certainly, than it ever has been.
Great, great. And then, yeah, yeah, no, that's very important. And, you know, just in the evolution and the history, like you mentioned, with environmental safety and health regulations and where things were, I can just imagine the evolution of this in my role as a former hazardous waste manager. I've talked to you both about that in the past with the cradle to grave management of chemicals and how that evolved over time. I think this is more expansive of that, where it's now incorporating probably matters of circularity or,
Right.
what are you doing with your end product? It should not necessarily be a waste. Can you reuse it somewhere? I think that's very important to know, and it's a pleasure to hear that there is buy-in out there from the world of corporations, and then of course when they hire consultants such as yourself, Beth, to make sure that they are complying, they're doing better. It's a moving target. I would imagine this ties into ISO and other certifications that show that
Certainly
you're
does.
auditing. So I'm sure that's great, and that's why I've had you on. And for me personally, this is my learning too. This is I it's such a new in my mind new concept or maybe rebranding of things because again, my thinking is cradle to grave, right? And I totally get it, but it's more than that. And with that, I think, of course, you've had to give bad news to these stakeholders on a product stewardship or other HASCOM matter. Tell us a little bit about those experiences. Let's start with you, Michelle. How's that gone for you?
Well, so I've been doing this for 30 years. So yes, I've had to give bad news. Um, certainly throughout my career, product stewardship and regulatory compliance have been known as that department who prevents sales. Michelle's here. We're not going to be able to do this. Right? But I've worked really hard to debunk that myth. Product stewardship should be known as the group that opens markets, that ensures business continuity. That I think at Sion, it is important. Our customers can trust that we're doing it right. I mean, that's a selling point. It's not just the technology that we sell or the products that we sell, but if I say something is compliant with TSCA, our customers can take that to the bank. And so I do give bad news, and I have given bad news, but can I tell you how the company embraces that bad news, how we respond, has to do with the reputation that you've built up way before you ever got to give the bad news, And I think you've got to, the business needs to understand that sometimes the bad news is not of my making, not even of our company's making. A substance that we've used, a raw material that we've used for a long, long time becomes a substance of concern, or it contains a substance of concern for the longest time. And even now, it's hard to predict. It's hard to predict what chemicals, are, it's like playing whack-a-mole, trying to figure out which chemicals are going to be the hot button issues. We're getting better at it. We have better resources for that, but that it's never a blame game. Let's just find out how it's going to impact the business, and if we can make a change, do we make a change? And it makes the blow of bad news a little better. Of course, if there's non-compliance, I've been lucky, and I can't think of top of my head of any real non-compliance issue where I've ever been faced with maybe a DOT, but labeling issue maybe one time a long time ago. But those kind of non-compliance, when you get a knock at the door by the authorities, that's much harder to that kind of news is much harder to bear, to give than some other. But certainly bad news we've had to reformulate products. We've had to actually put products on hold or withdraw them from the market. Sometimes that happens. So yeah, I've given bad news, certainly.
How about you, Beth, from the perspective of the consultant? Your
So,
bad news.
for better or for worse, oftentimes it's the difficult conversations that the consultants get brought into, but that lends great diversity to the really neat and really positive outcomes that we typically do ultimately find with our clients. And I really love what Michelle mentioned about thinking about product regulatory, product stewardship as a real way to differentiate on the market. I think that's so true. We talk a lot about product sustainability and green products and sustainable by design. And one thing that I say is absolutely. And foundation to sustainability is compliance. So no matter how green the product is, if it's not compliant, you can't sell it. So it is truly foundational to the future of product lines. And so really taking the lens of this is how we're really going to expand and grow our brand and our name is through the reputation of the compliance and the the impact that this product can have in a positive way on the world. On the difficult conversation topic, certainly, oftentimes what comes to us is a circumstance where there's been a breakdown in communication. And listening to Michelle talk, it certainly sounds like Xeon has some really important processes in place that keep the product stewardship team really well informed. And in a number of our client organizations, that is the case, and in a number of them, it's not. Product stewardship doesn't hold the same position of authority, let's say, in the teams. And sometimes the product stewards are brought in pretty late to the game, after commitments have already been made, after products have been ramped up, after manufacturing dates have been set, after sales have been made. Only to find, as Michelle had noted, that, whoops, we have a chemical of concern. We have a substance of very high concern. We have a listed chemical. We have a chemical that's not notified yet. It's actually not been approved. It's not been listed yet. Those are certainly difficult conversations. Oftentimes, we are brought in by the product stewards who have already set the tone for the difficult conversation with the sales team or whomever it is that's made the commitments. And really our role is to support that product stewardship team and saying, okay, what's the path forward? How can we turn this around? What are the realistic expectations we can set about, okay, first of all, is this going to make it to market? Are there protections we can include? Are there restrictions that we can agree to, that we can negotiate with the authorities that would allow us to get to market, but also meet the important safety thresholds that the regulators need to see in place before they will approve it? So again, oftentimes we can negotiate to what I would consider an ultimately positive outcome, but it doesn't mean it's not a difficult conversation to start, certainly.
Sure, along the way. Especially if that means some serious financial hits. Like you said,
Absolutely.
if the product isn't going to market,
Absolutely.
that's a big piece of bad news. And I think, mentioning the fact that you may have not come in at earlier on in the conversation, I think that makes it worse, right? A bigger hurdle to overcome.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's absolutely true. I think whenever we can be encouraging these difficult conversations to drive change in processes, that can also be a really positive outcome. How can we set this process up? How can we recreate our stage gate process so that product stewardship is consulted much earlier in product design, so that we can avoid these delays, these additional fines, these commitments that perhaps we're going to have to, if not entirely renege on, but renegotiate anyway.
And I'll add to that, you talked about substances of very high concern or like reach. Only under reach is selling a lot more bad news. And so often I have a conversation, I've said, well, we're going to exceed our threshold, right? Our tonnage band. And so now we have to buy, into a larger LOA for registration or whatever. We got to pay fees. If you're in sales meetings and everybody's so happy about, this expanded business, this new customer, and now I got to tell you that you got to write another check. And unfortunately, those conversations come up a lot. Or I want to sell it in this market, and that registration or notification is going to take. I mean, have you had to have a conversation where it's not on the Tosca inventory and an LVE? It's going to take a year.
Wow.
I mean, I wish I could get better news. And sometimes, I don't have control over it because the authority, but the way that you have control over folks understanding the bad news is training and involvement in business meetings. The business needs to understand, especially when it comes to writing checks, exactly what reach is. And exactly what registration and what is an LOA and why do they cost money and why do they cost so much money? Why has Tosca changed? Why is it harder? I mean, LVE used to be 30 days. And an LVE is still 30 days if you look at the regulation, but that's not what it takes, right? And so a lot of times, if you come in and it makes it a lot easier to bear the bad news when people understand the regulations and that they can predict that as they do see business ramping up in certain markets, that we're going to exceed that 1% 1,000 kg limit in South Korea. You know, they feel more blindsided when they don't have the background information or training. So we try really hard to be involved in discussions within the business and technical groups so that they better understand the regulations under which we must work.
Mhm. Would that mean like pre-planning ahead of time? Like if you're aware, I would imagine your upper management is saying, we're about to start a new product line somewhere. Would they bring
Of course.
somebody, your team in early on so that hopefully you're in that stage gate process, as Beth mentioned?
Of course, we're in stage gate that Beth mentioned, but can I tell you, it's even really more than that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, if you have a good stage gate process, a good product development process, a good marketing process, but something that has been really useful to me is as simple as including me on the monthly or weekly operations reports. What are we manufacturing? um, or on business reports,
Mhm.
the monthly report from the VP of Sales and Marketing. So as I read through that right, I may see something that we're sampling to a particular company, to a particular country, and I'm like, oh wait, you know, or that I see that there's some good news, and then oh well, that has this in it that we're going to have to maybe consider registration. Sometimes it's not doesn't have to be as process driven as stage gate or management of change, but to have complete transparency throughout the company, where I'm just included on emails that you wouldn't consider to include, product stewardship or regulatory on. Like, I'm not part of finance. I,
Sure.
I don't know. I can't bounce my checkbook, but I can just kind of keep an eye on what the business is doing and what is important to them and the new customers that they're bringing on, or maybe the new markets they're considering. That a customer may be buying our product for something different that our normal customers don't use it for, right?
Mhm.
It really is about uh, a conversation inclusion throughout the company as just a paradigm that we're just going to include them, even if it's more information than product stewardship needs or more information than regulatory needs, that you include them because I'm watching out. I'm watching out for things that you may not even be watching for. That's an important part of product stewardship programs.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
I
All
I
right.
I
Well,
absolutely agree that the forecasting piece is very important, Michelle. One of the pieces that we really strongly encourage when we are brought in to do any kind of product compliance review or audit, certainly we want to talk about current products, current markets, but we also want to talk about priorities. So what's coming in the future? Where are you looking? Where is the next hot market for you? Are you investing? What does your pipeline of new product design look like? Because as Michelle indicated, there may very well be some additional topics, additional regulations, additional considerations that we want to make sure that we consider. Um, the web of evolving regulations around the world is just ever complex. So really thinking holistically, not just today and yesterday, but let's think about what's happening in the near term and potentially even longer term as well.
okay. All right. And both of you touched upon this a little bit, as far as what was the feedback you both received after you shared that bad news. I'll let whoever wants to go start.
Beth, why don't you start this one?
Well, it certainly ranges. Again, oftentimes the product stewardship team has already gotten wind of, whoops, hold on. There's something here that I think didn't go the way that it needed to. And we'd like to bring in a third party to coach us through this. Um, but a lot of times the feedback that we get is sort of disbelief from whether that's a
Hmm.
sales team, marketing team. Um, but the commitment's already been made. I'm what do you mean that it's going to take longer? I heard that, just as Michelle said, I heard that under Tosca, this is essentially a paperwork exercise. It's 90 days. That's what the regulation says. Well, the product stewards have to be the bearers of bad news to say, okay, well, the regulation may say one thing, but business norms are another. And the daily practice of Tosca looks quite different. And sure enough, it's going to take quite a lot of time to build the case and the strategy. And if anything's missing from that strategy going in, you unfortunately can kind of be moved to the bottom of the pack, which can extend that timeline extensively beyond 2 years often. So I think initially the feedback can be disbelief. But ultimately, I do think, as we've talked about before, we can turn these into constructive conversations where in the past, product stewardship had not been consulted because people didn't think that this could be a hurdle, right? This was not truly, compared to the potential positive, the revenue that could be brought in by this product. Sure, okay, product stewardship is going to cost some things. I'm going to have to pay some $1,000s either to register or to purchase access to data so that I can register. Okay, sure, that's just a checkbox exercise. But what these conversations can lead to is a more holistic understanding of what the process really is, so that we can avoid these frustrations in the future, pulling these people into the conversation who often can be extremely important. Having your sales and marketing team on board, certainly for timeline and planning purposes, but also understanding how customers are going to use the product. Product stewards certainly know and recognize that intended use is a very important driver of what your risk assessment is going to look like, right? What that exposure potential is going to be, which certainly factors into how we register and notify products. So really building those partnerships, I think, can be a true positive outcome from these otherwise initially difficult conversations.
Sure. What about you, Michelle? What are your thoughts on that piece?
So, I mentioned it before that Xeon is pretty special in that, and we just have an overall philosophy. And this doesn't just mean product stewardship, but also safety and environment. Our SHE team, Clean Air Act, things that I'm not really part of, but just throughout the company, we have a general philosophy that we're just going to do it right. We're just going to comply. And sometimes that is sour medicine, but we're just going to comply. I would say from a substances of concern perspective, my experience is typically we, of course, group and talk about it. We look at where the customers are, how big the market is, where are we selling it, and typically we reformulate, and that's not easy. I mean, it just sounds like, oh, well, you just exchange this for this. Well, and so a lot of our customers are in the big automotive, industries, and they have very strict guidelines about how, changing formulations on them. And if you do change, then that gives them opportunity to maybe look for other sources. I mean, it's impactful to the business to change. It's impactful to our customers to change, but sometimes this is what we do. Sometimes what we do is we restrict sales, right? So maybe it has an SVHC in it, a substance of high concern in Europe. Well, we only have, a few large customers in the United States, and they don't care about SVHC. So maybe we don't change. I think that, depending on the circumstance, depends on what we do. Certainly if we find a noncompliance or something that, and also we make decisions, just recently, talc was, there was a notification that in the new monograph, and so has it been published, that IARC is going to change the classification of talc to a known carcinogen. And, the decision of the company is then, well, we need to reformulate and not use talc. And that's because we don't want to sell products that we have to say is a carcinogen. We just don't want that kind of, that just outside of our business objectives. I'm not going to say we don't have any products that we sell that are no carcinogens, but certainly within the product lines that use talc as a dusting agent, those are not carcinogens. And, for the most part, our customers consider them to be marshmallow fluff. And so, but now you're going to tell me it's a carcinogen? Well, we don't want to do that.
Mhm.
Well, we would rather, stop using that substance. It is fulfilling to work for a company that takes that approach. That we want to, phthalates. I mean, we got rid of phthalates years ago, way before they became, because they had some problems that they were estrogen mimickers. So we talked about it and we just we reformulated way before we ever got to a place that, where they were listed, PFAS, another one, although, PFAS are hidden sometimes. I have found fast that I didn't know about, but I do, we try to stay ahead of the game, but the company in general always is open to reformulating when that is possible. And that's good news.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely. And I think I'm hoping your company is not unique in that stance, but in industry as a whole, I think that may be a lower percentage of a company out there that has that mindset, but I'm hoping for more. We all do as people that use products, and your downstream users, all that, they should be kept safe, right, when they use your product. So happy to hear that that's something out there.
It's good business. I can't remember. Just recently, there was like some PFAS contamination and the company responsible is doing, spending millions, maybe billions to clean up. I mean, it is good for business to choose the safest alternative. It's good for the bottom line as well as, for people, health, and the environment. I mean, all of those are super important too. I mean, those are most important.
Oh, sure.
But the bottom line is important too. I mean, I'm in industry. We make money. That's what we want to do, and so doing it right, although it has some pain at the beginning, the overall pain is less if you just stay away from those substances of concern or you try to reformulate when you can.
Right.
You can't be reactionary. I've certainly seen substances where everybody gets their, worried about, and then it kind of falls off and it's not a problem anymore. I mean, I've seen that happen. But more often than not, when the chatter around the industry that a particular group of substances are bad, they're bad.
Yeah. Your competitors hopefully not good either. Good, Beth. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I absolutely agree. And going back to our conversation previously around product differentiation, certainly compliance being critical to your right to sell. But I think we've all seen in recent years the increase of green labeling on product and the ability to filter on a number of websites for environmentally friendly product. So increasingly, these sustainability indicators are another way to differentiate product. And I think something that I've seen just in recent years, the job of a product steward, when I started at ERM about 5 years ago, I've been in this consulting space for some time, but I moved over to ERM about 5 years ago. There was a pretty clear distinction between our product stewardship, product regulatory compliance customers, and our sustainability customers. And there wasn't too much conversation between those teams. And that has really merged over the past couple of years. Now, and I think for reasons that have made sense for a long time, the product stewards are absolutely part of these sustainability conversations. So much of what we do and have been doing for decades is really looking out for the sustainability aspects of these products, the health and safety pieces that make them sustainable, looking for alternatives. So folks, we've talked a lot about the European Union's REACH regulation, the alternatives assessments, right? Looking for safer alternatives has been a critical component of this regulation. Well, sure enough, we're now looking for more sustainable alternatives when we are considering product sustainability, sustainable by design principle. So again, absolutely core to what a product steward has been doing for many, many years. And again, it's truly a way to differentiate and to capture white space in markets that potentially can again really have your product show up quite differently in spaces where maybe your competitors don't have the same sustainability indicators matrices that yours do.
Right. And circling back to the communication, the feedback, did you ever find a breakdown ever in the communication or some other trouble spot that caused any negative feedback to happen in the first place? Whoever wants to start, let me know.
Yeah, I can jump in here.
Sure.
Absolutely. So I think that it is almost always about communication, right? So
Hmm.
I can't think of a single case where it seemed as though information was purposely withheld, right? That is not anything that I've seen
It's true.
in the projects in which I've worked, right? So in every circumstance I can think of, the difficult conversation is a result of some critical information not having been shared in a time frame that supported decision making. So, um, one of the things that Michelle spoke about earlier, I think, is so important, which is just raising awareness of what exactly is it that a product stewardship team does. We said at the very beginning of this conversation, product stewardship can mean many, many things, and really understanding product regulations, product stewardship within your organization, for your product portfolio, for your target market, for your objective. What does that mean? And really raising that awareness across your stakeholders who are involved in any part of your product manufacture, formulation, sale. I think that aspect can really transform what these conversations can look like, and turn them much more into collaborations as opposed to potentially adversarial encounters. That training piece, and training can look different, right? Just as Michelle was mentioning before, the sharing of information can happen in so many different ways. Sometimes it's adding people to listservs, and sometimes it's more formal training, right? So, okay, we're ramping up a new product line. Here are the markets, here are the regulations, here are the new things, the new considerations we really need to wrap our heads around. Who do we need to bring to that? Which stakeholders need to be part of that conversation? But I absolutely am. I'm a firm proponent of ramping up communication whenever there's any kind of business change. And frankly, if you have found that there's been a breakdown somewhere, there's been some aspect of a non-compliance, that's a really good indicator that, hey, you know what? Probably this is an opportunity to take a closer look and see what additional communications we need to put together and what additional stakeholders need to join this conversation.
Right. And Michelle, anything
I
to add?
would say,
Yeah.
sure, sure. I think that I kind of agree with that. I don't know if it's really necessary like a breakdown of communication where someone, intentionally kept information. That doesn't happen. I can't remember it happening really ever. But what I see, so so funny. It's like what I don't understand about the product may be problematic. What we don't understand about the product may be problematic. For example, unintentional impurities and byproducts. Historically, over the lifetime of my career, if it wasn't if it was unintentional and it didn't impact classification, so it's so small as to not impact the SDS. We didn't care about it, right? Well, we didn't look for it. We had no reason to look for
Right.
it. And now, certainly with REACH and SVHC, 0.1% of certain products and product chemicals and chemical groups, even if they're unintentionally there, even if they're there in an article, I mean, that's another thing. So we make chemicals articles. Well, what do I care about those? Well, now PFAS reporting is going to include articles. I mean, the a lot of time the communication breakdown is in areas that we've never had to worry about before, and now we do. So regulations change, then, and it's not like the scientists are keeping this information from me. Have they even really looked at impurities that are unintentional, byproducts, reaction, products that, are there in very small amounts. They're not hazardous. We don't have to report them like for the Tosca CDR. We just never looked at them. And now we're having to take that deep dive. And we're having to take that deep dive across the globe because we import a lot of products from our, affiliate and parent company. And so I need them to be transparent and to look at, and I'm not a chemist, you look at my bio. I've worked in the chemical sector for my entire career, but I need, some hand holding from, the polymer chemists who are just so incredibly smart that they know the chemistry, but if we don't ask, then why would they tell us? And so we have to be smarter about that. And as the regulations change, we are getting smarter, right? Some of our early problems were things we didn't know, but now we look for so we don't get, surprised in the future.
And I think going back to earlier, what you both mentioned, pre-planning in the process, right? Being there at the early stages of discussion, having those conversations with the subject matter experts, the scientists, with your expertise, right, as a product stewardship, as an SHE manager, with the regulatory changes being what they are, the moving targets every year. Now you're bringing in multiple countries into this. That's super important, right? So, going back to the bench scientist whose day-to-day operations have nothing really to do with your regulations, at least giving them the inkling that, yes, in the chemistry you're looking at, keep in mind there are some 0.1% thing that we're looking at that we haven't in the past, but keep that on your radar. So when somebody like Michelle comes in to your office, we can have the good discussion ahead of time so it doesn't lead to a bad discussion. So, and I think that's a great point there. And I think you've kind of touched upon this. If there's any more recommendations you have to avoid the trouble spots that you find. Beth, do you have any of those?
I mean, we've talked quite a bit, I think, about awareness raising and mechanisms for doing that. I think the other thing I would emphasize is being forward-looking. So we're thinking not just about current day, but future plans too. And to the extent that product stewards can be involved in that kind of education of product stewards about business priorities. What are we looking at? Where do we want to move next? What are there product lines we're thinking about acquiring? That's another really big game changer in a product regulatory department. Oftentimes, a consultant will be brought in for the sole purpose of helping to integrate a new product portfolio because the product stewardship team is already really busy managing the existing portfolio. So I think whatever kind of forecasting and prioritization that the product stewards can be brought into, or questions that product stewards can be asking of the executive team, just so they can so that they can also raise their own awareness of how their job profiles may be shifting, depending on what company decisions are made.
Great. Anything to add, Michelle?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that I don't know everything, and I can't do everything. I mean, and even though we have a sound product stewardship program, I use consultants and lawyers all the time. And you need to have a budget for that because they know what I don't know. And sometimes it's easier to have a consultant look at a problem than for me to spend so much time and then still be a little wary about how I'm interpreting it. Mm-hmm. Consultants can actually save you a great deal of money and time because they know maybe exception to certain regulations, like an LVE or low regs or some other way to get things through TSCA easier. Certainly worth consulting people who know,
Sure.
Also, something, it was actually a tip that I gained just in this conversation. I don't think we include the sustainability experts with our company. We certainly have those, they're just part of a different department. I need to be, well, we need to collaborate more. I've been doing it a long time, and sustainability was never kind of on the radar, and now it is. And I need to take advantage of those experts
Well,
within my own company and outside.
mhm.
That's good advice for everybody.
Nice. I'm glad then we've had this dialogue. So even see, as you said,
Well,
you're learning things every day too. So excellent.
that's
Well,
right.
so on that note, let's end on a bit of a parting thought here for both of you. What would you find the benefits are for an organization to incorporate product stewardship early into their product development program?
Avoiding bad news conversations, right? Or at least turning those conversations around, setting a different tone for
Sure.
instead of having to retroactively make changes, proactively think about product design differently. To me, that's a true opportunity to um, differentiate products from the get-go, and potentially even think differently about a marketing strategy, right? Adding components to a marketing strategy, a sustainability angle that perhaps isn't there or could be strengthened. Um, and absolutely saving time and money, if you're not having to go back and rework or rethink or renegotiate. Having those products stewards be part of the conversation early, um, and also having those stakeholders we've been talking about aware from the beginning. Hey, here are some watch outs. Here are some things I need to be looking out for, either avoiding and what I'm thinking about, product design, chemical, and how I'm thinking about new molecule, and also what kind of information are my friendly product stewards going to come and ask me for, so that I can have that ready and available from the beginning.
Nice. Nice. How about you, Michelle? What are your thoughts?
So, back, I work for, industry. Let's talk about the bottom line, right? If you involve me early, I can keep you from spending a lot of time and money on research and development when selling to a particular market is going to cost, $300,000 to get it to the market through, chemical control regulations or biocides regulation or whatever. You're just going to use a small amount of something and you think that's a great idea, but really it could be costly. There's great reasons to include us for all the bad things that could happen, but I can, involving me early can keep you from spending a lot of money, or I can give some advice on, this would be a great product because it's phthalate free. Include that in your marketing of the product. So, product stewardship is not just those folks that stop sales
Right.
or ensure compliance. That let us help you build your business and be profitable, and doing it right. Um, that's an important reason why you should include me early.
Right. Well, again, thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on. This has been an excellent discussion, and I'm hoping the listeners out there have learned as much as I have just in this great talk. Visit hackyourhascom.com to learn more about both of today's guests, and as well as if you have questions, any comments, love to hear more from you. I'm sure they are willing to help you out with this ongoing journey we have in the world of compliance and product stewardship. Thanks again. Well, and you have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Thanks, Janu. Good to
Thanks
talk
so
with you,
much.
Michelle.
Thanks.